It's time, boys and girls, well, mostly guys, cause that seems to be the demographic. Anyways, it's time for a build guide, and unsurprisingly it's the Caustic Arrow Trickster. The reason as to why is pretty simple. There were a lot of changes to what I said on the league starter video to what's actually happening in game. The game also went through a couple changes in the difficulty department, and as such we've had to adapt to them. Before we begin today's guide, if you end up enjoying the video, remember to hit the subscribe button. The channel is pretty close to 100 subscribers, which is 100% unreal, and I do feel humbled that a few of you have stuck with me for a bit. So if you enjoy the content, subscribe for more PoE shenanigans. With that being said, let's talk about this Caustic male. The build's concept is the first topic. We're gonna be playing Caustic Arrow as a Trickster. Caustic Arrow itself is composed of two parts. The first one, which is the projectile itself, converts 50% of your physical damage to chaos. The DPS dealt by the arrow hit is dependent on attack speed, accuracy, flat damage, etc. And we don't really care about it. We are focusing on the second part of the skill, which is the pool of acid created by the arrow itself. The Caustic Ground deals chaos damage over time. It is not poison damage, and as such it is not an ailment. At the same time, we're gonna be playing a Trickster, and I chose the Ascendancy for two reasons. The first reason is that this guy is like the guru of damage over time, and the other reason is that he is pretty good as an evasion / dodge tank, and who doesn't like relying on luck to avoid getting hit, am I right? So let's talk about leveling, because leveling this guy is an absolute breeze. First, you must understand that the chaos damage over time does not give two shits about your weapon's DPS. Because of that, there is nothing on most bows that is of any use to you, besides the gem levels. During leveling, you don't really need to have a lot of extra gem levels on the bow to get you started. In fact, I would recommend waiting until the endgame to start investing in a nice bow. However, you are relying on damage over time to hurt enemies, and as such we are using a very specific set of gems to get us going. Since this was my league starter, the setup I used to level was Caustic Arrow, Conk Effect, Vicious Projectiles and Void Manipulation. At the end of the main story, I had enough currency to get a 5-link Steelwood bow. The 5th link became Swift Affliction. Your biggest hurdle is the mana cost, because the setup will become a bit mana heavy really fast. To circumvent that, you can use a mana flask. We only used 2 DPS flasks in the end, so the mana flask may never end up leaving your belt anyways. Now we're gonna dig into the actual build itself, starting with the tree and Ascendancy, following the path I took while leveling, and they look like this. Alright, so let's talk about the gear. The first and most important component of this build is the bow. As a Steelwood, a Reflex or Maraketh bow. We use one of these bases because they come with the intrinsic increased movement speed mod, and since we don't really care about the weapon's DPS, they are best in slot for our little shindig. This bow needs to have gem levels as a mod. This means that you're more than likely gonna have to craft the weapon. To guarantee levels of Caustic Arrow, you can use an Essence of Dread, which applies +X to level of socketed bow gems depending on the essence tier. The other way to get gem levels, or modifiers, is through a faceted fossil. This fossil is expensive and for the needs of a league starter not very realistic. Using a faceted fossil should be saved for when you absolutely need to min-max the ever-loving shit out of your character. The last option is alteration / alchemy / chaos spamming. The goal is getting +1 or 2 levels of socketed bow gems and +1 level of socketed gems. You also want an open prefix to craft either increased damage over time or chaos damage over time multiplier if you have it. Ultimately, the goal is using plus level of socketed support gems from Katarina, the Syndicate Mastermind, instead of the damage over time crafts. Okay, the rest of the gear is pretty simple. Originally, I suggested getting only rare gear as the loadout. With the difficulty changes, bosses are thicker and I opted to invest in a carcass jack. This unique is not mandatory at all, and frankly I would recommend using a regular chest with a fuck ton of life and resists instead, but if we're being honest, using either is gonna be down to your own preference. The gloves originally were allelopathies. You can still use them for early mapping, but eventually you're gonna have to invest into the Hunter's Influence or Elder Influence gloves in order to roll them with chaos damage over time multiplier, which is going to bump your DPS a hefty chunk. Also, we can get life and resists here, but it all comes down to the craft not fucking you over, like all Path of Exile things. For the quiver, there's a new modifier in town for regular quivers, and that is damage over time multiplier. Mandatory mod because it's a bit of DPS we didn't have before 3.9. At the same time, the best option is going for a Hunter Influence quiver because that can roll chaos damage over time at the same time as the regular DOT mod, and those are some fat DPS gains you can't sleep on. Granted, you're probably gonna have to craft that yourself. On our jewelry, I did a switcheroo bamboozle on the League Starter video because I did say that minimum frenzy charges were not mandatory, and they still aren't, but I spent 100 cows on veiled jewelry these past days looking for minimum endurance charges, and after those 100 cows, I got 2/3 out of an endurance charge craft, while frenzies were ready pretty fast. Henceforth, my jewelry has frenzies crafted on them. One of the rings needs curse enemies with level 5 despair on hit, while the Hunter influenced rings can roll these. I advise going for a delve ring instead because they tend to be cheaper with how shit most of them roll, and we only need resists and some life anyways, so it's not like you're gonna be spending mass money on a semi-decent one. Just make sure it has an open suffix for the frenzy. The other ring and the amulet need life, resists, mana regen, and an open suffix for the frenzy. The amulet is going to be anointed with aspect of the eagle for some life, movement speed, and damage over time with bow skills. It is also a very cheap anoint. The belt is a Stygian Vice with life, resists, strength, and I crafted damage on it. The Abyss Jewel needs life, damage over time while holding a two-handed weapon, and the last mod can be anything you want. Your helmet needs the enchantment Caustic Arrow damage. Personally, I advise using the Merciless Laugh version until the Uber Laugh version is dirt cheap. Anyways, you want life and resists on this one. Lastly, for the gear, the boots need movement speed, life, and resists. For enchantments, I recommend movement speed while not getting hit. The 4 jewels we use need increased maximum life and either chaos damage over time or flat damage over time. The last mod can be anything you need or want, attributes, resists, or damage. For flasks, DPS wise we use a sulfur flask and a witchfire brew. Alright then, time to talk about gem setups. On the bow we need Caustic Arrow, Link to Conk Effect, Swift Affliction, Void Manipulation, Vicious Projectiles, and Slower Projectiles. Slower Projectiles will eventually get replaced with a level 3 Empower. I haven't done so because I'm waiting for those to be cheap. For auras we use Malevolence, a level 9 Clarity, and Skitterbots. Originally I recommend using Aspect of the Spider, and that is still valid to use instead of the Skitterbots, but since the bots are readily available there is no reason to not use them and they provide a guaranteed shock. We also use a multiple spell totem setup with Wither to apply Withered to bosses. Only use these for single target. The rest of the gems are a Flame Golem, a Valve Light for single target, Withered Step for the elusive buff, Enduring Cry for endurance charge generation, Flame Dash that I sometimes remember to use, and a cast when damage taken setup with Molten Shell and increased duration. And with all of that being said, now we talk about some thoughts on the build. First things first, leveling is going to be a breeze. Map tiers up to 10 are a breeze. Past tier 10 shit starts getting pretty hectic and it's not precisely on the build. The game has had a difficulty increase. As such, from this point forward, our characters are gonna require a lot more investment to feel smooth. Luckily for us, we are using some very obscure shit that in most cases people don't really care that much about trading, so we can get away with things here and there. The bow, for example, is the most expensive piece of equipment, and even then the price is not that outlandish. Some of the gear is gonna be self-crafted and I recommend that you keep it that way. The character itself is pretty good because he doesn't really need to be inside an enemy's comfort zone in order to deal damage. It's a pretty comfy playstyle because we plop the caustic pool on a pack of monsters and we run off to the next pack. Most enemies are gonna die immediately to a single pool of acid, so even the mana cost is not an issue. Personally, I advise investing into chaos resistance. Recently a lot of shit deals that damage type, and while I have no room for that defense type on my gear, I recommend not committing the same mistake and trying to get at least enough chaos resistance to not be in negative numbers. Just remember that bosses are gonna take a bit of wiggling around, but that's the norm nowadays, so don't sweat it. There is a big chance that the next video still features this character, and that is due to the fact that the next build is still in the pre-planning phase, aka I'm still acquiring the ingredients to that recipe, so until that is ready, we're gonna be casting it up until then. So that's it for today's content. It's a rather meaty video and a lot of things were said, so hopefully you found it enjoyable, and if you did, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Thanks to your support, we are close to the first 100 subscribers, and hopefully that means that we are on the way to even more people joining the channel's audience. Anyways, thanks for watching and hopefully I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.